Anyway, this is, I've written a book called The Ghosts of Lake Tahoe. However, I know we're dealing with Halloween here, and my book title sounds very apropos, but it's not. The Ghosts of Lake Tahoe is 12 short stories on some of the historical characters that lived around the lake over the last 150 years. Okay, so this is more in keeping with the sesquicentennial anniversary of the state of Nevada. And we're going to get an easel here. I don't know whether you know, in 1904, thank you so much. Thank you. Do we have an easel?
I do. I'll go grab one right now.
In 1904, St. Louis had the World Fair. Who remembers that? It was one of the biggest fairs that America had put on at that time. And every state sent exhibits. Every of the 48 states sent exhibits to St. Louis, and Nevada. I have to be very careful here. I'm sorry. I'm English, okay? And we say our A's differently. So if I lapse into saying Nevada sometimes, forgive me. But Nevada sent 2 exhibits to the World Fair. Not that you're going to know what they were, but one of the main exhibits that Nevada sent was a stagecoach of our local stagecoach driver, Hank Monk. Anyone familiar with Hank Monk? Mm-hmm. Well, Hank Monk was perhaps the most incorrigible man that ever lived under the sun. But he was an excellent stagecoach driver. And I don't know if you're familiar with his reputation. They certainly were back in the last century. When I'm talking about the last century, I'm talking about the 19th century. Hank Monk used to drive his stagecoach more often than not in a state of inebriation. There was no Nevada Highway Patrol back in those days, and to keep himself company, he used to keep a whiskey bottle by his side, at least one, if not 2. And perhaps on a cold winter's day, he might have even had 3. And he used to drive the stagecoach. In his later years, he used to drive the stagecoach from Carson City to Glenbrook on the east shore of the lake. Great. Thank you so much. Oops. Oh, it's not quite big enough. Is that poised? Is it? Oh, just about, just about. He also used to drive the Kings Canyon Road. Anyone ever hiked Kings Canyon? It was you have, well done, that's marvelous. And that was the main connection between Carson City and the east shore of the lake back in those days. Now the trail at Kings Canyon is still there. Now, was the slide there when you hiked it? Because there's been a slide on Kings Canyon. It makes it a little bit more difficult to hike nowadays. Hank Monk also used to drive the Kingsbury Grade Road. as well. What did I say? Hike? I mean, he used to drive his stage on the Kingsbury Great Road. Now, you've driven the Kingsbury Great Road, right? And you have to be a fairly good driver to drive the Kingsbury Great Road today. In the best of weather. But Hank Monk used to drive the Kingsbury Great when it was just a trail. And he used to drive it all year round. Now, you had to be a good driver, a stagecoach, and a team of horses drive the Kingsbury Great Road in those olden days when the road was just a trail. But you had to be a marvelous stagecoach driver to drive the Kingsbury Great Road in those olden days when the road was just a trail in the middle of winter. And we used to have some very heavy storms up at the Sierra Nevadas back in those days. And you had to be a good driver to drive the Kingsbury Great Road in those olden days when the road was just a trail in the middle of winter through the bad weather and the thick snows. But Hank Monk used to drive that trail more often than not in an advanced state of intoxication. And you had to be a dang good driver, a stagecoach and team of horses drive the Kingsbury Great Road in those olden days when the road was just a trail in the middle of winter through the bad weather and the thick snows and when you were drunk. And there were times, however, come on in. There were times, however, when Hank Monk used to get so drunk on top of his stagecoach that he used to confuse his whiskey with the horse's water. Mistakenly, he used to drink the horse's water, become accidentally sober, and you had to be a damn good driver, a stagecoach and a team of horses drive the Kingsbury Great Road in those olden days when the road was just a trail in the middle of winter through the thick snows and bad weather when you were drunk, but also when your horses were drunk. But Hank Monk had a reputation of always getting to his destination on time. Now, the story that I've written about Hank Monk is one of 12 stories. One of 12 stories. And perhaps we'll cover all the stories. I don't actually know how much time I have. But the story I've written about Hank Monk is perhaps his most famous adventure with Horace Greeley. Everyone knows Horace Greeley? Horace Greeley founded the New York Tribune. And also ran for president back in 1872. Did you know that? Horace Greeley came out to Nevada. In actual fact, he didn't come out to Nevada. I was just going to say he came out west in 1859 to see the West. And you're familiar with Horace Greeley's most famous saying?
Yeah. Go west.
Go west, go west, young man. And it actually went on, go west, young man, and grow up with the country. And it was Horace Greeley's misfortune to have Hank Monk as his stagecoach driver from Carson City to Placerville. Anyone familiar with this story?
No.
Well, you will be if you buy my book. Horace Greeley was perhaps the most famous Easterner that came out to this part of the territory. And I say it's the territory. You know, in 1859, Nevada did not exist. It was the western half of Utah territory. And it was, of course, governed by Brigham Young, the famous Mormon leader in Salt Lake City. And on his journeys west, Horace Greeley stopped at Salt Lake City, and he had the and only, as far as I know, interview with Brigham Young in Salt Lake City. And it was after his visit to Salt Lake City that Hank Monk came further west and came to town. Well, I was going to say Carson City, but to some people it was known as Carson City already, but it was better known as Eagle Station. And the little community grew up again around Eagle Station, and this is where the stage started from. And my story is about Horace Greeley coming out west. And Hank Monk was a drinker, but Horace Greeley was teetotal. And the two of them humorously locked horns at the beginning. And the story I set in the present tense, okay? I take you back to the event. although I start the story in 1877, it's actually remembering the ride. It's called Remembering the Rough Ride of the Tribune. That's what the story is called. And I'm not going to tell you all the story, okay? But there's a picture of Hank Monk in the book. Now, the funny thing is, here at the Historical Society, they've got some great photographs here. I don't know if you've been through the library here, look at the old photographs. Well, they have a picture in an envelope that shows a young man with it's almost a profile picture, and it's kind of not quite this side, but of a young man with a very aquiline nose. On the envelope that's in this microchip film, someone's crossed out on the envelope, not Hank Monk. However, I believe, have anyone seen that? Has anyone seen that here in that room, in this room? I believe it is Hank Monk. It's when he's very young, okay? And most of Hank Monk's photographs are head on, so you can't really see his profile. But anyway, to go back to the story, Hank Monk plays a game of cat and mouse with Horace Greeley on the stage. And it's a humorous story, very humorous story, how he gets him over to Placerville, actually on time, although he leads Horace Greeley to believe that they won't get there on time. That is, as I say, I won't tell you the whole story. That's one of the stories in the book, okay? One of the other great Nevada characters, heroes, is our local Pony Express rider. Does anyone know who I'm talking about?
Mark Twain.
No? Pony Express rider. Pony Express rider. Right? I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm not really going out on a limb here. I will say he was the greatest Pony Express rider that ever rode for the service. All right? He was a Londoner, born in London in 1840. And he joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show for 2 years. You know, Buffalo Bill wanted Sitting Bull. He wanted a good Indian, or a well-known Indian. He wanted Annie Oakley, and he wanted this young man as well. In actual fact, this young man was older than Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill was supposedly rode for the Pony Express back on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. But Buffalo Bill, Bill Cody, would have been only a young man of 14, or a young boy of 14 or 15. But at the time of the service, perhaps the best known Pony Express rider was our local rider down at Friday Station on the southeast shore of the lake. Anyone been to Friday Station or seen it? Still there. Most of the residents of the city of South Lake Tahoe don't even know it's there. They drive past it every single day if they're going past State Line. And you come down the Kingsbury Road, you turn left to go to State Line. You'll see that white weatherboard building on the left-hand side opposite Edgewood Golf Course. That is Friday Station. That is Friday Station. Well, there used to be a restaurant at Harris. You're quite right. And
Was there a post office right there?
well, there's a post office up Kingsbury Grave Road, but the actual this is what it looks like today. Now, the Parks family owned it for over 100 years. It was their private residence, and you couldn't go into it. Unfortunately, the Parks family no longer own it. It's now part of the Edgewood Development Center, and as a part, it's all part and parcel with the golf course. That's what it looks like today. That's what it used to look like in the olden days. The only difference that you can tell looking sideways to the building is they put more windows in it than it used to possess. Okay, but that's Friday Station, and Pony Bob Haslam was based at that station. All right, why was he the most renowned Pony Express rider? Because he rode for the Pony Express. You know how Does anyone know how long the Pony Express lasted?
About a year and a half.
A year and a half, 18 months. From April of 1860 to October of 1861. And something happened here in Nevada in the spring of 1860. What happened here? Did anyone know?
Well, the train.
Huh?
The train drive.
No?
Telegraph?
Telegraph?
The Paiute Indians
Oh, yes.
went on the warpath. We had the Battle of Pyramid Lake. All right? You know, a militia of 105 men went in pursuit of the Paiute Indians after Williams Station was attacked on the Carson River. And it was the worst massacre of a militia by any Indian tribe. 76 of the 105 were killed by the Indians. There was a state of panic in Virginia City. And it was at the time of the Pony Express. A lot of the riders wouldn't ride because of the Indians, except for our brave young lad. Normally, he would ride a distance of 75 miles, roughly, from Friday Station over the eastern range of the Sierras, through the Carson Valley, up into Eagle Valley, and then over to Honey Lake down the Carson River. He rode to his other home station, was Bucklands. It was right in the middle of where all the Indian trouble was. And Pony Bob Haslam was wounded twice by the Indians. A flint arrow went through his jaw, knocked out 3 of his teeth. True story. True story. It's in here. All right. And of course, we've just spoken about Mark Twain, all right? Mark Twain. Everyone knows Mark Twain, of course. And started his writing career up in Virginia City. And do you know why Mark Twain came out here?
His brother.
Because of his brother, right? Yeah. Came out here because of his brother in 1861. And his brother was Orion Clemens. And Orion Clemens came out west because he supported Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln rewarded him with the position of Secretary of State for the new Nevada Territory in 1861. And that's when Mark Twain came out here in the summer of 1861. Now, there is some controversial controversy whether Mark came out in June of 1861 or in July of 1861. That isn't very clear. But he came out perhaps a few weeks after the start of the Civil War. He was with the Missouri militia for a little while at the start of the Civil War, because you know he was a riverboat pilot before that. And that's how he got his name, of course. You're an intelligent audience, I can tell. You know that Mark Twain means.
Measurement in water.
Right? 2 fathoms means safe water. And the reason that he adopted the nickname, the pseudonym, was because the news was going to be safe in his hands. Not really. Unfortunately, Mark Twain and the truth weren't very close companions. All right? In actual fact, I got to tell you, if you've read Roughing It, who's read Roughing It? All right? You'll see a little anecdote in Roughing It, which concerns Hank Monk. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Well, the little anecdote that Mark Twain writes about Hank Monk is that he is told, which is also featured in my story, he is told about Hank Monk and the Rough Ride that he's given Horace Greeley. And he's told that story by one of the fellow passengers on his way to Carson City. And every time they stop, they change passengers. He's going all the way to Carson City. And the second passenger that gets on the stagecoach tells them the same story, verbatim. And by the 5th time, he's told the same story verbatim. He doesn't want to hear it. And unfortunately, the person who's telling the story gets so upset that he can't tell his own version of the story that he dies. That's the little anecdote. That's a little anecdote in Roughing It, which concerns Hank Monk. All right. Okay, one of the the Mark Twain story. The Mark Twain, I've got written the Mark Twain story. This is about his duel in Virginia City. Did you know that he had to fight a duel? in Virginia City? Actually, Mark Twain actually wrote about it himself, but I've extended the story somewhat. Okay, as you do, you tell these stories for a long time, you add little bits to it. So this is a much longer version of Mark Twain's duel in Virginia City. He was challenged by one of the reporters of the other local newspaper. Mark Twain wrote for the Territorial Enterprise, and James Laird wrote for the Daily Union. They were fierce rivals, the two papers. And because Mark Twain wrote an editorial about some of the ladies down in Carson City, which the Daily Union said was all made up, which it was, of course. It was all made up, and he insinuated that some of the women weren't very honest with their financial dealings. The Daily Union got hold of that, and they said that Mark Twain was an unmitigated liar, and the Territorial Enterprise was a rag of deceit. As it progressed, they had to fight this duel. And Mark Twain, besides carrying a very ancient derringer on his journey out west with his brother, wasn't very used to firearms. Even having been in the Missouri militia 2 weeks, he'd never fired a firearm in anger. And of course, as it transpires, James Laird was a fairly good shot. And Mark Twain was facing certain death. This takes you up to the very instant of the duel. Story in here. Mark Twain nearly didn't become a more famous author. All right, one of the other stories, of course, this doesn't just involve Nevada. This is Ghosts of Lake Tahoe, of course. 2/3 of Lake Tahoe in California. So some of the stories about my California heroes as well. The story about the hole in the lake. Has anyone heard the story of the hole in the lake? You've heard the hole in the lake? All right, actually, a colleague of mine by the name of McAvoy Lane. Anyone know McAvoy? Mac. All right. Mac and I used to work at the same radio station together. And I don't have him for plagiarism, but he actually wrote an abbreviated version of the hole in the lake story in the Tahoe Weekly just recently. Did anyone see it? Thank goodness. Because my version is so much fun. This is the only truly fictitious story in the book. Okay, every other story is based in some kind of historical fact. Okay, but I'll give you an abbreviated version because it's not. Some people know it. It's about a dead body turning up in the bottom of the Savage Mine. The Savage Mine in Virginia City was the deepest mine of them all. It was over 2,000 feet deep. And back in Virginia City in those silver mining days, the mine shafts, especially the lower mine shafts, used to flood with water. Very bad, serious problem. And one day the silver miners find a body of a dead man floating on the surface of the flooded shafts in the Savage Mine. They drag the body from its watery grave and no one recognizes who the man is. He's no silver miner because he's too well dressed to be one. And inside his pocket he's got a gold fob watch. So it's not just a mystery who killed this man, it's a mystery who this man is. And you have to go back in time to Carnelian Bay on the northwest shore of Lake Tahoe. A man was rowing his boat off the north shore there at Carnelian Bay in April of 1869 and found out that his boat was going round and round in circles. He was about 200 yards offshore. And he stops rowing, he pulls off a little bit to the side, and he realized that there was a whirlpool 50 feet below the surface of the lake. He can see whirlpool tightening, and you can see there's a hole in the bottom of the lake. He knows, because he's an intelligent man, he knows that maybe this hole in the bottom of Lake Tahoe is responsible for the flooding of the mine shafts in Virginia City. So he calls up a friend of his down in San Francisco, a man by the name of Colonel Clare, who was a stockbroker on the San Francisco Stock Exchange. And he invites them to come up and to have a look at this hole at the lake. So they both go out on the lake again. They rediscover the whirlpool, and they come to the conclusion the hole is about 2.5 foot in diameter. And they reckon if they shape a conical plug for the hole, there might be some money to be made. Well, I'm going to cut the story a little bit short because it's in the book. You'll get the whole length of the story, but they shape a plug for the hole. They plug the hole up. And the mine shafts and the Savage mine incredibly get pumped dry for the first time. Even the lower mine shafts get pumped dry, and they're able to restart mining again. Well, before that actually happened, Colonel Clare returns to the stock exchange and starts buying up all the stock in the worthless Savage mine. Once they plug the hole up and they are able to restart the mining again, stocks and shares go back up in price. And Colonel Clare is able to sell his stock for $1 million in profit. Having done it once, they thought they'd do it again. So they go back out to the plug, they pull it again, the mine shafts plug once more, operations stop again, the stocks and shares go back down to their low price. Colonel Clare returns to San Francisco a second time, buys up all the stocks and shares at the low price again. They both go out and plug the hole a second time, and they cable the mine shaft to try and pump the mine shafts dry again, which they do. And 2 weeks later, they're able to remine the whole lower shafts again. The stocks and shares go back up to the high price. And he goes back down to San Francisco and banks another $1 million in profit in the same bank account. Having done it twice, they thought of it twice was about as much as they would and should get away with. But for some unknown reason, William Meeker, Colonel Clare's friend, gets a knock on his door late at night or late in the day, and it's his friend Colonel Clare. And he doesn't know why Colonel Clare's come up to the lake. And he suggests some dinner. But Colonel Clare wants to pull the plug. He says he sold it to someone that he doesn't like. He sold the shares to someone he doesn't like down in San Francisco. So he wants to ruin this guy's reputation. So he said it would give him the greatest satisfaction to pull the plug again and to bankrupt his nemesis down in San Francisco. Well, as they're rowing out towards the plug, and just as they get to the plug, William Meeker attaches the chain to the winch. He's just got the plug free. Colonel Clare remarks, "What a beautiful moon we have this evening, William." But William Meeker has to turn around to look at the moon. And as his back is turned, Colonel Clare grabs the winch handle, sneaks up behind him, and bashes him over the back of the head. "This is where you came in." Because it was William Meeker's body they found at the bottom of the Savage mine. That story actually originates from 1903. It's not my original story. My version is original. But it was written by Sam Davis, Carson City News editor. And you know the Nevada Appeal down in Carson City? That was his paper. The founder of the Carson City News. So Sam Davis is buried in Lone Mountain Cemetery in Carson City, and also our hero Hank Monk is buried there. The gentleman knows a lot about this. That's good. And he perhaps knows about this. You know, the headstone of Hank Monk's grave has fallen over and broken. Now, Tom Berkovich erected a new headstone, which was a very nice thing for him to do. However, he neglected to say that Hank Monk was perhaps the best stagecoach driver west, was immortalized by Mark Twain, also immortalized by Artemis Ward. Do you know anyone know Artemis Ward? Well, Mark Twain is our favorite, or recognized America's favorite author, right? Well, Artemus Ward, who went to Virginia City and visited with Mark Twain, a contemporary of his, was Abraham Lincoln's favorite author. Artemus Ward also wrote about Hank Monk's stagecoach ride with Horace Greeley, but Artemus Ward actually had the stagecoach originating in Folsom, going to Placerville, and that's not true. It's not true. It did go from Carson City to Placerville, and the town, remember, there's a plaque there that commemorates the stagecoach ride. One of the other exhibits that Nevada sent to the World's Fair in St. Louis was his stagecoach and his gold watch. And I don't know if you were lucky enough, perhaps just, 2 or 3 years ago, the watch was sold. It was on display in the Bucket of Blood Saloon. The Bragg family had it for the longest time, but it's now been sold to a private collector. I actually tried to get in touch with the new owner so I could photograph the watch in color, but unfortunately he never got back to me. So it's regrettable, but that's lost to the state. But what's unfortunate, I think more than anything, I think my friend in the back of the room would also agree, is that Hank Monk needs better recognition. Certainly the most famous stagecoach rider. I've intimated that he was notorious not just for drinking, but he could turn a stagecoach round on a city street at full gallop. So he is a glorious character, incorrigible, very incorrigible, and that's what comes out. That's what comes out in the story.
How many horses did he have on the coach?
Well, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Now you see the stagecoach, usually they have 6, but I believe that Hank Monk only used to drive with 4. Okay, but if you look at the Wells Fargo stage anytime, you'll see that it's got 6 horses. But certainly for Benton's, he would have only had 4. And in my story, he only has 4. Okay, so that's a very good question. All right, one of the other stories is about Captain Dick Barr. Did everyone know Captain Dick? Hermit of Emerald Bay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? There are at the back of the book. All the stories, by the way, all the stories start off. I'm very proud of this because it was my idea. But every story starts off with the stars and stripes of the year of the story. So you can see the progression of the stars and stripes as you go through the book. What was my point? I don't know what my point was. What was I talking about? Oh, Captain Dick Barter. Captain Dick, our hermit, Emerald Bay. Oh yes, at the back of the book, I have all the historical backgrounds to the stories. That's Captain Dick. All right, Captain Dick. And I've got some great artwork in here. Now I'm going to say that, aren't I? Anyway, but this picture here is Albert Bierstadt. Anyone familiar with Albert Bierstadt? Perhaps the best landscape artist of the 19th century. Very famous for his paintings of Yosemite. But he did half a dozen of Lake Tahoe. This was perhaps the first oil painting of the lake ever done in the 1860s. It's the front cover of the book. Now, I would love to show you a big picture of this picture on the back. This is an incredible photograph. You'll have to get the book to see it up more closely.
Did he do any up in Blackwood Canyon?
I don't know about that, but I'm going to tell you, this is also Captain Dick, by the way. This is pen and ink drawing done by a friend of mine who's a great artist. He actually went on to work for Disney. But if you look over to Captain Dick's right foot over here, you'll see he's missing 3 toes. You know that story?
I think I've heard about it.
All right, so this is a true story, completely true. By the way, this is Frank McCarthy's. Anyone familiar with Frank McCarthy? Probably the best Western painter of all time, and I rate him above Frank Remington and Charles Russell. A more modern painter. He was of the 20th century. Unfortunately, he's been dead about 10 or 11 years now. But this is his picture of the Pony Express rider. And that picture could have actually been painted for the story in the book. When I saw that picture, I said, I got to have that picture. And I was lucky enough to get it. This is also the painting. I had to pay copyright for all these pictures. So that's why the book's $1 more than it should be. This is a local artist by the name of Keith Brown. This is the outlet of the lake into the Truckee River. This is done from an old postcard before the turn of the 20th century. That's what it used to look like before the dam was there. Okay. Keith Brown lives down in Grass Valley. This is a great painting. I'm so sorry that I can't show you this painting in color. This is Mian Situ's painting of the Chinese railroad workers on the Transcontinental Railroad. Right? One of the stories is about a fictitious Chinaman called Zheng Lo, who comes from Shanghai, or just outside Shanghai, to join the working crews building the Transcontinental Railroad over the Sierra Nevada mountains. And he gets into trouble. The story of how he gets into trouble and how he gets out of trouble are in the book. But this is such a great painting. This shows the Chinese railroad workers, and there's little explosions going off over here. And this is just above the American River. So the actual painting is of the Chinese. They called them powder monkeys. Now, don't get upset by that, because they called themselves powder monkeys. Okay, and Mian Situ, it's a Chinese painter, Chinese American painter. He called it the powder monkeys of Cape Horn. Cape Horn is a very difficult precipice just outside, just east of Colfax. But I make a distinction that going over the granite rock of the Sierras at Donna Summit was very much more difficult, especially in the winter weather. Okay, this is another Albert Bierstadt painting. This is looking down from Donna Summit down to down to Donna Lake. All right. And although I don't write about the Donner Party, so much has been written about the Donner Party, I don't write about the Donner Party, but I do make mention of the Donner Party when trapped on the east shore of the lake at the time. Anyway, getting back to Captain Dick, you know, he used to live on the southeast shore, and I make contention with what the placard says. Emerald Bay. Anyone seen the placard that remembers him? It says that he rode to the Tahoe house in Tahoe City this one winter's day. I think that's totally ludicrous. Now, he might have done it in the summertime, but, you know, rowing from Emerald Bay up to Tahoe City, that's a 30-mile round trip in a dinghy rowing in the middle of the winter. I don't think Captain Dick was that stupid. And the reason why I don't think he was that stupid is because if you look at that picture, you see that picture of that boat that he's handmade? The guy was a sailor. So I have my story where he's going over to the southeast shore, to Roland's Lake Tahoe, which was only a distance of 6 miles. But he gets caught in a winter storm. On the way back, he's a little bit inebriated too. Gets caught in this winter storm. It buffets his boat around so much that he breaks his mast. And he has to spend the night in his little boat, the night of the winter storm. And the story goes that when he got back to his cabin, he noticed that his toes on his right foot were not a healthy calf. And Captain Dick knows that it's gangrene. So he knows that he either has to take his toes off or he's going to lose his whole leg. So he performs amateur surgery on himself. It's a great story if you like blood. It's in here. As far as I know, I'm the only person who's written about Captain Dick. I'm gonna blow my trumpet a little bit, okay? As far as I know, I'm the only person who tells the whole day of Hank Monk and Horace Greeley from beginning to end. All right? Because even Mark Twain didn't do that. And even Artemus Ward didn't do that. But I tell actually how Captain Dick took his toes off. So if you're a little bit squeamish, you might want to miss that story. Okay, one of the other stories is of our, sorry,
What about the lady?
the lady?
Tea house.
He had no lady. Oh, that's Laura Josephine Knight. Well, that's, I don't write about Laura Josephine Knight. I'm sorry. Laura Josephine Knight bought the property in the late 1920s, and she was supposedly the sponsor for Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic. Put up most of the money for Spirit of St. Louis, the aeroplane that he flew from America to worship in Paris. So
But she built the tea house.
she built the Vikings home on the
Yeah.
shoreline and the tea house on the island. Yeah, exactly right. You know that island is called Fanak Island mostly, but it's also called Dead Man's Island after Captain Dick.
Did she have a big cabin up further on the lake somewhere?
Well, now see, I tell you what, you know why Captain Dick was there in the first place, do you? He was the caretaker for Ben Holliday's cabins. Ben Holliday, the stagecoach magnate. Okay, they just happened to accidentally meet. He wanted someone to stay there all year round, and so Captain Dick was the first all year round resident, not just of Emerald Bay, but of the entire southwest shore.
That's a beautiful place.
Yeah, because the road around the southwest shore of Lake Tahoe was not built until 1913. Okay, so one of the other stories is about our bad man, Jim Stewart. I have no idea how long I'm supposed to be up here. If you go up to Tahoe City, you go to the Trail End Cemetery in Tahoe City behind the golf course. That's where the local cemetery is. What's amazing about that cemetery is most of the occupants of the graves in Tahoe City, at least 50% of them are under 35. So, but one of the graves is the resting place of Jim Stewart. Nothing to do with the actor. All right, Jimmy Stewart did come to Lake Tahoe. Did you know that? He was in Rosemary. They filmed it in 1936 down at Emerald Bay. But bad man Jim Stewart, buried in Tahoe City's Trail End Cemetery. He was nicknamed the Silent Terror. He was a lumberjack, big man, big, mean man. And when he used to get a little bit worse for wear, drinking, he could be very mean. And he was what they called the Silent Terror. When Jim Stewart turned up at a saloon, a lot of the locals used to leave because he was killed in 1872 in a gunfight. Campbell's Custom House, which was actually built on one of the wooden piers at Tahoe City. It's not there anymore. But he was killed in the gunfight. That story of that, how bad man Jim Stewart came to his end, is in the book. And I'm just going to try and find a picture of Campbell's Custom House because I know it's here. The historical photographs are in the back of the book. Now, you can't see it very well, but that was Campbell's Custom House. It was built on one of the boardwalks at Tahoe City. You know the old train? The train in the early part of the 20th century used to connect the Transcontinental Railroad in Truckee with Tahoe City. Well, the Roundhouse, still called the Roundhouse, by the way. You know, it's right next door to Boatworks in Tahoe City. It's the other building on the other side of the Roundhouse. That's where they used to turn the train around. And so the train used to go all the way along the shoreline there. From the Tahoe Tavern, used to go all the way along the shore, and then they used to turn the train around. Because the train was pulled up, the railroad track was pulled up in 1943 to help with the war effort. Okay, but Jim Stewart, that's our bad man, and I called that the dreaded evening drink. Okay, and then one of our other heroes, well, somewhat of a hero, is Martin Lowe, who used to perform aquatic tricks over at Homewood. I start the story off down in San Francisco in the year of 1906. Important year, San Francisco, 1906. The earthquake. He's an earthquake survivor that comes up to Tahoe City to escape the mayhem. I actually start the story off in the earthquake, and he wants to get out of San Francisco. They were killing looters. They were killing innocent people back in those worst days of the San Francisco earthquake. So it wasn't a great place to be. So he left San Francisco, came up to Lake Tahoe, and he started performing aquatic tricks for some of the passengers on the steamers. The SS Tahoe being one of them, Queen of the Lake, and Ernest J. Poe Min, who was the captain. And they used to throw dinner plates over the side of the SS Tahoe, and Martin Lowe used to go and retrieve them. And a story of how, this is the picture of the SS Tahoe. That's Ernest J. Poe Min. You can't see it very well, but that's a picture of the captain now. Okay, so one of the story concerns him. I have what I think, although some people have written about it, I got the story of the bid for the Winter Olympics. Okay, this is not the story of the Olympics. It's the story how they got the Olympics. All right, against all the odds. Alex Cushing only did it for a bit of publicity. And I start off the story telling you that Alex Cushing could sell sandals to an Eskimo. That's his how he got the Olympics. And that's called In the Halls of Zeus, that one. All right. This picture on the back concerns one of the other stories. I can't tell you that story right now, because there's a little bit of a twist to it. Also, there's a little bit of a twist to another story that concerns Glenbrook in 1937, which has to do with some of the celebrities that used to come up to, you can't really see this, I'm sorry, you'll just have to buy it. But do anyone can see, or do you recognize who that is? This is Glenbrook Beach. Can you see who that is, man? Oh, you don't have your glasses. Can you see that? Can you recognize that person?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Fairbanks. Looks like Fairbanks.
Very close. It's Clark Gable. But close. Very close. It's Clark Gable. It's Clark Gable. And he used to hang out at Glenbrook quite often. Well, a lot of the celebrities came up here, to this part of the country. You know why, don't you? To get their divorces. And Clark Gable came up to Glenbrook back in those days for that particular reason. I don't know, you know the road that goes around Lake Tahoe? You know the last part of the road that was built? No? It's Highway 28, around the northeast shore. And you know who opened that road? Carol Lombard opened that road. Carol Lombard came up to get divorced from... No. You've been reading the wrong magazines. Well, okay, Dick Powell. She was married to Dick Powell. She wanted to marry Clark Gable. Exactly. That was his love of his life. Carol Lombard was. And Carol Lombard came up to Clean Village and stayed with her friend Mary Stack at Incline Village. And Mary Stack had a son who fell in love with Carol Lombard. He was only a teenager at the time. You know who that was?
Robert Stack.
Robert Stack. Robert Stack. And actually, Robert Stack actually appeared in Carol Lombard's first film, her last film to Heaven. So, of course, Robert Stack is better known
Out in
It's
this.
one of the Untouchables.
Yeah.
Okay, so they used to live up on the northeast shore of the lake. So there's a story concerning the Glenbrook Inn. Okay, it's called Mutiny at the Inn. I called it Mutiny at the Inn because of Clark Gable. All right, but there's a couple of other celebrities in the story, which I won't tell you about. Okay, but you know, Rita Hayworth came to Glenbrook as well. She used to play golf. You know, she was a great golfer. She used to play golf at the Glenbrook Golf Course. And she came to get divorced from son of the Aga Khan, Prince Ali. And you know, she was actually threatened. You know, they actually had to put because of her daughter. Prince Ali and the Muslims wanted her to be a Muslim. She didn't want her daughter to be a Muslim. So you're talking about nowadays. There was some problems back then too. They actually had to have some secret agents, some secret service people, give some protection to Rita Hayworth when she was living up in Glenbrook. All right, there is a story about Snowshoe Thompson in here. I have to admit to it. Okay, it's a slightly different story. Okay, it's a tribute story. It's the last story of the book. It's called Sesquicentennial. That's very hard to say, by the way. You know, Sesquicentennial. It's a tribute story about three guys who tried to imitate Snowshoe Thompson in 2006. Now, Snowshoe Thompson started his mail delivery in 1856. So that's why it's called Sesquicentennial. All right, and I actually mentioned Snowshoe Thompson in the Hank Monk story too, because Hank Monk makes the suggestion to Horace Greeley that you ought to stop and interview Snowshoe Thompson, and to which Horace Greeley says, "I don't have time for this. You know, I'll come back to Lake Tahoe and I'll interview all these people, but will you please hurry up with this page?" Well, Hank Monk played with him. Okay. Let me see, what story have I not talked about? It's 12 short stories. What story have I not talked about?
How about Kit Carson? You don't mention
No, I do not mention Kit Carson. You know, obviously everybody knows that Carson City is named after Kit Carson. And, you know, I do talk, by the way, that's a great picture of a bald eagle, which goes with the Captain Dick story. Because you have to leave. Oh my goodness, you haven't bought the book yet.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. All the stories, and how long do I have here? I'm supposed to be winding up? Okay, well, great. Great. Well, this is, you know, I think this is a good time to wrap up. So anyway, I'll just go through the quick stories. I told you about the artwork in here. I used to be the cruise narrator for the MS Dixie for 9 years. From 86 to 95. I don't know if you took the historical Glenbrook cruise at any time, those of you. Anyway, so about 30 years has gone into this book. About 30 years of research. The first book story is called Solid Gold. That's about Bob Haslam. All right, the Pony Express writer. The end of the era, which is end of an era, sorry, is the second story. The Immortal Faces Death, that's Mark Twain's duel up in Virginia City. Jung Lo is named after the Chinese railroad worker. The Hole in the Lake story, which I more or less told you, abbreviated version. Three-Toed Island is the Captain Dick story. The Dreaded Evening Drink is the Jim Stewart story. The Remembering the Rough Ride of the Tribune, that's the Hank Monk story. From Disaster to Triumph is the Martin Lowe story, the aquatic marvel of Homewood. The Mutiny at the Inn is the story of Clark Gable. And the Hall of Zeus, in the Halls of Zeus, is the Squaw Valley Olympics bid story. And then Sesquicentennial is about Snowshoe Thompson. Okay, so I hope you, if you want to buy the book, I'll be glad to sign it for you. Should I tell them the price? That's all right.
And you're in the...
I'm in the hallway.
In the hall.
I'm in the hallway. Yeah, I'm in the hallway. So if you want to ask me any other questions, are there any questions you can ask me at the table? Are there any other general questions right now?
Well, that's good, you know.
Huh?
Spoke about the Pony Express ride,
Yeah.
75 miles.
75 miles over about 5 stations.
You had to stop 5 times. You changed horses.
Yeah, about 15 miles. Every 15 miles they changed. It may have been a little bit. I talked about his first horse when he set out from Friday Station because he had to go up and over the mountains. It may have been a little bit shorter, that one, because obviously it took a lot out of the horse. Okay, that's a great question. Any other questions?
Was Carson a rider?
Was Carson a rider?
Yeah.
No, Kit Carson was an explorer, an Indian fighter. He was known as an Indian
He
fighter.
didn't ride.
Tassus, New Mexico. No, I don't think that. All right. You know, I do, in the back of the book, I do talk about Fremont. Okay? I do talk about Fremont. Okay? And his part in the Mexican War. Okay? So that's in the book. And Kit Carson obviously mentioned. Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.